أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ولي الصالحين ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله إمام الخلق والمرسلين صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We thank Him and we seek His forgiveness. And we send peace and blessings on the final and most beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. O you who believe, fear Allah that He is most deserving of, and do not die unless on the side of Islam. Tonight, inshallah, ikhwani, I'll be continuing on with the torch that was started a few weeks ago. And a severe aggression has taken place against our brothers and sisters in Gaza. As a consequence, the Muslims have woken up to one of the issues which are detrimental to their existence in a particular part of the Muslim world, which is called Palestine. What is Palestine to us, ikhwani? What is Jerusalem? What is Al-Aqsa? Where do they all fit within our aqidah? Where do they all fit within our history? Where do they all fit within our makeup as a Muslim who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Where do they all fit in the equation of being a Muslim, wherever part of the world we are in? And here I am, inshallah, tonight, ikhwani, continuing on from Al-Khilafah Ar-Rashida all the way to the era where the Crusaders just began attacking the Muslim lands. So inshallah, tonight, in about 30 minutes or so, I'm trying to cover about 400 to 450 years worth of history. So you can imagine how easy this is going to be, inshallah. So all our request is that you open up your ears as well as your minds, inshallah, as well as your hearts. Because wallahi, it is not the ears that listen, but it is indeed the hearts that absorb the information, inshallah. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us listen, understand, and as well as pass on what we learn here, ikhwani. Because one of our responsibilities as Muslims is to pass on what we have learned. And we have heard in the past few weeks how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed for Palestine and Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa to enter to the Islamic empire, which is vastly and quickly expanding throughout the world in the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu. At the end of Al-Khilafah Ar-Rashida, by the death of Ali radiallahu anhu, and all the quarreling that took place and all the problems that took place at his time, rahmatullahi alayhi wa radiallahu anhu, wa karamallahu wajhah, we had a new Islamic state which ruled out of Damascus. Dimashq, as it's known today, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala free and its people from its tyrants. This Islamic state was called Al-Khilafah Al-Amawiyya, ruling out of Dimashq, ruling one of the largest empires at that time, stretching all the way from the borders of China to the outskirts of Spain. So you could imagine how vast and large this Islamic country or Islamic empire was. And it started in the year 41 Hijri. And the Muslims initially, ikhwani, and I'll be talking a lot about the history of Palestine, but also the history of the area. Because ikhwani, when we understand the history and the makeup of the people and what was taking place in the background around Palestine and around Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, we'll know why Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa was in the hands of the Muslims. And once we know what the Muslims were doing to each other, we'll know why Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa was taken away from the Muslims. There's an equation, ikhwani, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states clearly in the Quran, In tansurullaha yansurkum. If you give victory to the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself will give you victory. And vice versa. If you let the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala down, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let you down. The Khilafah Amawiyya, one of the strongest Islamic empires that came throughout history. Young, ambitious, strong, ruling the lands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them so much power, so much influence. However, they began on a very strong note with Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa as well. And in the year 65 Hijri, one of the Khulafa of Al-Amawiyyin, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, began building Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and expanding it. We all know that Umar radiallahu anhu built the mosque itself. But the foundation, the borders, beautifying the mosque, the minarets, etc. Umar radiallahu anhu wasn't too concerned with that. The Umayyads spent a lot of their time, money and effort building that, ikhwani. And it took 7 years. Also took the wealth of the Egyptian economy for 7 years. We're talking about billions of dollars in today's terms. 7 years worth of money to build Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And it was completed 7 years later, ikhwani. Also in the year 67 Hijri, and there'll be a lot of dates I'll be throwing at you just to give you a picture and a snapshot, where are we in history. In the year 67 Hijri, so after 67 years from the migration of the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Medina, 67 Hijri, the Muslims built a city, a brand new city in southern Palestine called Ar-Ramla. This city never existed, ikhwani. And in that we need to understand something. The Jews who have entered Palestine throughout history, they will enter, then they'll leave, they'll enter, then they'll be kicked out by either the Persians, the Romans, by their own problems, etc., have never actually established anything new. One of the problems of the Jews and the Bani Israel who have entered Palestine in the past is that they've never actually established any new cities. They found Jerusalem, so they've occupied it. They find the city, they'll occupy the other city. They'll not establish anything new on their own. Whereas the Muslims, within a few years, have established a brand new city called Ar-Ramla, which linked all of Asia with Africa. Imagine all the trade routes, all the traders, all the people buying and selling and traveling from all the way from Russia to southern Africa can travel through Ar-Ramla. Can you imagine how much money was being generated by one city that the Muslims have built? Can you imagine how much wealth? Can you imagine how much da'wah that the Muslims were doing? We built this city, you come, you trade here, we give you da'wah. A lot of people will come to the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and embrace it simply by doing business with Muslims. Just by establishing a city, ikhwani. And the Khilafah Umayyah, ikhwani, started off well and slowly became weaker and weaker with time. And in the year 129 Hijri, just before its fall, just before the Khilafah Umayyah had fallen, on its last legs, a massive earthquake takes place, which destroys parts of Palestine, parts of the structures, including Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa was destroyed by a natural cause, which was an earthquake. And the Umayyads, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them, rushed to rebuild Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, its surroundings. And however, they finished off the era by have been overtaken by another Khilafah, young, enthusiastic, cousins of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Al-Khilafah Al-Abbasiyah. So Al-Khilafah Al-Umayyah were some parts connected to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam. Now they are overtaken by the cousins of the Prophet alayhi salam, the children of Al-Abbas radiyallahu anhu, the uncle of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam. His descendants came and overtook the Khilafah from the Umayyads. And there was a few battles here and there, and they have taken it over. However, the Abbasiyin, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with them, I would say rahmatullahi ala al-jamia', may Allah have mercy on everyone, they had a new way of doing things, especially within the Muslim lands. The Umayyads sort of received it on the silver platter to some extent. They were lax towards the religion, lax towards the people. The Abbasiyin were a bit harsher towards the people. However, at the same time, they were extremely favoriting the scholars and the religious figures of that time. So someone like Al-Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, Al-Imam Abu Hanifa had his times with the Abbasiyin, but to some extent he was looked after, him and his students, and his knowledge was spread. So was Al-Imam Malik, Al-Shafi'i, and so on. The Abbasis, the Khilafah Abbasiyya, looked after scholars and the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the same time, they spent a lot of their wealth developing this city, which they loved very much, called Jerusalem, Al-Quds. So here we have a Khalifa, and the Khilafah Abbasiyya moved from Damascus, and they built a new city called Baghdad, as it's known today. Baghdad never existed in history. They built it out of scratch, and they moved to it. They moved their the rulership, and they ruled from Baghdad. What were they ruling, ikhwani? They were ruling parts of Spain, all of, a large chunk of Africa, spreading all the way to the Middle East, all the way to the borders of China. one man, one Khalifa. Remember that, Ikhwani. When the Muslims are united, when the Muslims are under one leadership, Palestine and the Aqsa is with the Muslims. Remember this. The moment that the Muslims start to fight amongst each other and pick amongst each other and have problems amongst each other and fight with, have allegiances and align with the enemy against the Muslims, that's when Al-Aqsa and Palestine are taken from the Muslims. It's like a thermometer, Ikhwan. Here we have in the year 152 Hijri, another earthquake hits Jerusalem again by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is mainly destroyed. Can you imagine? The second or the third holy site in Islam, the first qiblah in Islam, the land that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called Mubarakah, blessed. Every time Al-Aqsa or Palestine or Jerusalem is mentioned in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accompanies it with the word blessed, Mubarakah or Muqaddasa, holy. This holy blessed land had received an earthquake from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then Masjid Al-Aqsa was destroyed. So now the Muslims have rushed, and the Khilafah Abbasiyya, we honor them for what they've done. They spent their money, their time, everything in their power to rebuild Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, and they built it better than what it was. And in the year 169 Hijri, and I'm giving you dates, Ikhwani, so you could remember these dates and know where we are in the scale of history. In the year 169 Hijri, one of the Khulafa al-Muslimin, one of the Khalifa of the Muslims, his name is Harun al-Rashid, who was at the peak of the Abbasi Empire, Abbasi Khilafah, and at the peak of the Islamic Empire, sends his delegations and messengers to the Christians. The Christians, Ikhwani, during the time of the Muslims, were allowed to come in. They may pray, they may visit their churches, they may visit the birthplace of Jesus, rahmatullah ala Isa alayhi salam. They may visit their holy sites. However, they never took it upon themselves to build anything. Now the Muslims are telling the Christians, come and rebuild your churches. You want to make your churches bigger? Come make them bigger. You want to, decorate them? Come decorate them. You want to build water places for them? Build water places. And the Muslims had no problems in that. Furthermore, the Muslim armies used to defend any Christian pilgrimage, Hajj, Christian Hajj. The moment they entered the Muslim lands, he was under the protection of the Islamic Khilafah. If anybody touched this Christian, would have to deal with the soldiers of the Khalifa himself. And that's the power and that's the might of the Islamic Khilafah. At the same time, it is Islam's system, Ikhwani. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to force people to accept Islam. We will protect their faith for them. In the Al-Uhd al-Umariyya, when Umar radiallahu anhu entered Jerusalem, he had a particular pact, a particular oath with the Christians who were in Jerusalem, that we Muslims will protect your churches, and that no one will touch their churches or harm them, and no one will harm even their cross. And that coexisted, Ikhwani. And that's why you have a lot of Arab Christians who lived in the lands of Palestine preferring an Islamic rulership rather than a Christian or a Jewish rulership over Palestine. So in the year 169 Hijri, Ikhwani, Harun al-Rashid even opened it further, and now we have the Christians being allowed to come into Palestine, rebuilding their churches, spending money, decorating their churches, and that was allowed for them. So Ikhwani, from the time of the Khulafa Rashida, from the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, all the way to the year 280 Hijri, there wasn't, forgive me for using the word, there wasn't much action going on. People were peaceful, Islam was prospering, Islam was expanding, people were coming close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, people visited Jerusalem, even Christians were allowed to visit Jerusalem, even Jews were allowed to come in, people traded peacefully. Islam had made Palestine and Jerusalem one of its main cities, Jerusalem being one of its main cities, a lot of trade, a lot of prosperity, a lot of economical advances. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. After the year 280 Hijri, we started to see a few problems take place. And this problem, one of the main problems, Ikhwani, is that Muslims themselves, we're talking about the grandchildren of the warriors who have opened up the lands, we're talking about the great-great-grandchildren of the Sahaba, the great-great-grandchildren of the Muslims who started this Islamic empire. they've received Islam on a silver platter. They didn't have to work hard for it. So now you had Muslims who are neglectful of their religion. He might pray Fajr, he may not pray Fajr, he'll pray Dhuhr. You know, the Islam began to weaken. 300 years after the Prophet ﷺ, some Muslims began to weaken, their faith began to weaken. Simply because they found it too easy. We rule the world. We take jizya from so many countries. We are extremely wealthy. We have armies with, you know, nearly an infinite number, and so on and so forth. Muslims had it so easy, they didn't have to sort of hold on to their religion. That's one problem. Another problem, we had a particular sect, the Shia Sect, which began mainly at the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, and sort of grown exponentially after his death radiallahu anhu, after the death of Al-Hussein radiallahu anhu, and so on and so forth. The Shia sect, ikhwani, began to fragment. They began to divide within themselves so much that you had a normal Shia, then you had a extremist Shia, then you had an extreme, ultra-extremist Shia. These guys, you could not even talk to them. These guys would consider normal Shia to be out of the fold of Islam. Figure that one out. So you had, at the same time that, you know, normal Muslims, Sunni Muslims were laxing, everything's so easy. You had all these Shia movements beginning to work in the background. So now the Islamic Empire, so big, so powerful, so strong, but it's like a very old man. His body parts are beginning to wear out. His eyesight is not working as strong. His hands are becoming weak. His hands are shaking. His legs aren't holding him as strong. Like a very old man, but still standing strong. And we had a particular group called Al-Qaramita taking place or existing in that time, about the 300 Hijri odd. Who are these people, ikhwani? You had normal Shia who was started by a Jewish man from Yemen, Abdullah ibn Saba, who went out and called people towards, first of all, giving favoritism to Ali radiallahu anhu, and that kept evolving to so many sects of Shia, where some of them are practically nearly normal, as some of them are actually out of the fold of Islam, where they believe that Ali radiallahu anhu, when he cries it rains, and when he screams there's thunder, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into too much depth. This particular group has dissected from so many branches of Shi'ism. So there was mainstream Shia, then you had Al-Ismailiyya, and so many branches. Then we had Al-Qaramita. So you could say like a ultra strict form of Shi'ism. Even normal Shias would consider him out of the fold of Islam. These people, just to give you an idea, no one has ever done this in the history of Islam. They once attacked the Kaaba. Can you imagine? Mecca. They attacked Mecca and attacked the Kaaba, broke the Kaaba, took the black stone out of the Kaaba, ran away with it to Bahrain, built their own Kaaba, and told people, come, do your Hajjiyah. For 22 years, the black stone was out of the Kaaba, out of Mecca and the Kaaba, and it's in Bahrain because of these Shia people. Just to give you an example of what these guys did. Okay, so now we have Al-Qaramita, and they took over a country which is called today Bahrain. Then we have another form of Shi'ism, but a bit more moderate, you know, a bit more lax Shia, starting in Morocco and spreading throughout northern Africa. Can you see where the Khilafah is going? We have strong Muslims who have scared the whole world. Now we have Muslims who are sort of starting to eat each other. And the interesting thing about both Al-Fatimiyin and the Qaramita, they weren't too concerned with the public. They won't come to a mosque and tell people, look, turn into Shi'ism, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you Jannah, you'll be guarded. And so they weren't really concerned with that. They were just concerned with two main things, money and power. They'll concern themselves with the leadership of a particular country. They'll penetrate its classes until they take over. They'll never try to impose their ideology, their aqidah on people. Some parts of the Shia movements did. However, the mainstream Shia guys weren't too concerned about people. Yani if they actually believed that there were people of Jannah and people of Jahannam, they could not care less. As long as they were in power, money and power, that's all they were after. And they got that. They spread through Morocco, Algeria, Libya, until they were stopped by the Muslim or the Khilafah armies on the borders of Egypt. And they had to back off and go back there. So now, Ikhwani, if we want to have a quick snapshot of the Islamic Empire, we have the Khilafah in Iraq, controlling the surroundings of Iraq. Northern Bilad al-Sham, we began another Shia movement called Al-Buhaiyun, or alongside that name. Another moderate form of Shi'ism started northern Iraq in certain parts of Syria. We have western parts of Africa becoming Shia. We have certain parts of the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Bahrain for example, becoming under the control of extremist Shia guys called Al-Qaramita. At that moment, Ikhwani, can you imagine? The Muslim world is so divided, so misguided, so fragmented. Where is the leadership of the Muslims? Asleep. They received this leadership, they received this rulership, this khilafah on a silver platter. They don't have to work hard for it. The reports will come and the messengers will come and the army commanders will come and tell them, look, we've just lost North Africa. They'll tell them, that's fine. That's far away from us. That's a month away from us. We're safe here, no problems. They'll tell them, look, we've just lost certain parts of Arabia. They'll tell them, that's fine. That's away from us, as long as we're safe and secure. And the Muslim masses, Ikhwani, were too busy just living their day to day. Just like today, Ikhwani. Today we hear about Syria and what's happening in Syria. What do we do? Tomorrow morning we'll go to work, we'll go to uni, we'll go to school. It's as if nothing happened. The day to day, the rat race. Just like we're living the rat race, someone else was living it before us, Ikhwani. And someone else will live it after us, Ikhwani. What did they achieve? Al-Muhim. So now, Ikhwani, at the year 300 Hijri, now we have the start or the beginning of the Shia sort of semi-empire, taking parts of northern Africa, Arabia, northern Bilad al-Sham, and they started to spread. So much so that they've taken now all over Arabia. And then a group called As-Sulayhiyun. As-Sulayhiyun, Ikhwani, were another form of Ismailis. Whenever you hear the word Shia and Ismaili together, just know extremists amongst the Shia. They're known even within their own sect. Extremist form of Shia also taking over Yemen and joining allegiance with the rest of the Shia countries. So now a lot of the Muslim world was taken over by the Shia people. And as I said, it wasn't the people, the masses were still normal Muslims who worshipped Allah through the Quran and the Sunnah. So there were Sunnis, but the Shia Madahib were interested in the power, in the state. Imagine that, let's assume they came to Australia, they'll just go to the Parliament House. You won't even know about them. But Australia will be considered as a Shia country, let's say. But we won't know about them. We'll go about our day, our life, nothing, as if nothing happened. However, they're in power. The money and power, the politics, the political side of things, and the financial side of things were in their hands. Now, all that, Ikhwani, continued for about 60 to 80 years. We had a bit of a honeymoon for the Shia, until the honeymoon ended, when they, unfortunately, the Shia themselves, and when I say unfortunately, it's due to these movements that the enemies of Islam thought, look at the Muslim world. And they weakened the Muslim world. And they killed the masses of the Muslims. And they weakened the countries and the resources of the Muslims. Therefore, the West kept a close eye on the Muslim lands and what's happening in it. So these Shia countries and semi-countries and cities began to fight one another. So much so that Al-Qaramita, the most extreme form of Shia, started to attack. They were a very tiny group. They would attack, the Khilafah, they would attack Egypt, they would attack Yemen, they would attack Syria. A very tiny group that would start, of extremist Shia will start attacking all the other Shias, called Al-Qaramita. And in the year 386 Hijri in particular, we witness the beginning of the end of this Shia honeymoon. Where was Palestine, Ikhwani, in the midst of all this? Where was Al-Aqsa? You'd had countries which will take over and send its troops to Palestine, so it will take over Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in Palestine. Then the Abbasids will kick them out or send out an army and they'll remove them. Then another country or another army will come from the Fatimiyin who ruled Egypt, and so on and so forth. So you had this backwards and forwards movements of power shifting between whether Palestine's underneath one Shia country or another Shia country, or between the Abbasiyin or another group. Up until this man who managed to, his ancestors managed to take over Egypt, and he's managed to end or begin the end of this Shia empire. And his name was Al-Hakimu bi-Amrillah, the ruler by the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ikhwani, if you study this man's history, you know he's got nothing to do with rulership or the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His name is one thing and his actions are a completely different thing. This man had another nickname in history called Al-Majnoon, the crazy man. Why was he crazy, Ikhwani? This man had honestly no sense of leadership, no sense of rulership. For example, one rule that he outcasted and he imposed on his people, just to give you an example, he ordered all his countries, I'm talking about millions of people, we're talking about all the way from Morocco to Bilad al-Sham, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, etc. Millions of people living underneath his rule, all of them to sleep throughout the day and wake up at night and work. Figure that one out. That's why they called him Al-Majnoon. They couldn't handle him. People, it wasn't about Shia Sunni here, it was about, hey, this is a bit too much. This is way out of sanity here. Another thing that this crazy person did, he ordered his soldiers who were ruling Palestine and Jerusalem in particular to destroy Christianity's holiest site. Is that in Islam allowed? It's not allowed. These Christians are in our land under our protection. You are not allowed to destroy their land. You are not allowed to destroy their churches. You are not allowed to harm them as long as they're peaceful. The Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, "Man ada dhimmiyan faqad adani." If a person harms a dhimmi is a Christian or a Jew living in the Muslim land, in the Khilafah Islamiyah, in the Muslim Khilafah, if you harm him and he was a peaceful Christian or a peaceful Jew, you've harmed the Prophet ﷺ. Can you imagine what extent we're talking about? This man didn't harm just a Christian. He went to their main church and destroyed it. Kanisatul Qiyamah. Ikhwani, imagine we're here today or tonight, and we hear that the Americans went and dropped a bomb on Mecca, on the Kaaba. That's the kind of thing that this man did. So obviously, this man angered, not only did he anger the Muslims, and not only did he disturb Palestine and Jerusalem, his problems echoed throughout the world, throughout the Christian world so much that he began what we call, and what we'll talk about next week in depth inshallah, the Crusade Wars. What were the Crusaders? Christians who live in Britain, live in France, live in Germany, live in all the in Western Europe, jump on their ships, hold their swords, coming towards Palestine. What would cause that, Ikhwan? It's crazy people like this. Al-Majnoon. Al-Hakimu bi-Amrillah. Don't forget this name, Ikhwani. This man was one of the reasons which invited the Crusaders to our lands and made them invade them. This man had a lot of issues as well, Ikhwani. He would force these people to do particular things that maybe in their lives, maybe in their work, maybe in their social systems, in their justice systems. He honestly had a lot of issues, and people started revolting. So much so that even the Bedouins in Palestine, the Bedouins, which are sort of the least affected people by the rulership of this man, decided to revolt against this man. However, this man sent his armies and sinked that and sort of suppressed the Bedouins in Palestine. And by the time he died, Ikhwani, what did he do? He fragmented the Shia empire. He began and gave permission to the Crusaders to start propagating in the Christian countries, to fight the Muslims and to have hatred against the Muslims. He also began so many wars within the Shia countries, killing thousands of them. All this, Ikhwani, was happening, and the Muslims were far away from their religion. Where were the scholars of Islam? We had another problem, Ikhwani, which was happening in the background. When all these Shia movements took power, they worked on a few aspects or a few angles to make sure they maintained their power. One thing was to suppress the mashayikh and the scholars, the greater scholars. So much so that there's another group from the Shia which was called Al-Hashashin, the Hashishis, What were they called that name? Because they actually allowed, they said it's halal to use hashish, which is a drug which intoxicates you. This group, Ikhwani, used to grab, a young brother who's sitting, he's got nothing to do with the world, give him hashish, intoxicate him, give him a few highs, and send him off and assassinate any imam, any scholar, any sheikh. And they assassinated so many people. Scholars, mashayikh, leaders of armies, leaders of countries. They even got close so many times to Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, rahmatullahi alayhi. They assassinated one of the founders of the Zenki dynasty and Zenki countries. Can you imagine how powerful these people were? Hashish. They lived in the mountains. Whenever they needed to do something, they'll grab a young man, give him a bit of hashish, the man will feel high, they'll give him his target, and he'll go. That's one other group which existed, Ikhwani. However, in the background, in the midst of the darkness, being away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Muslims had no economical power or influence, no government, unified governance, no unified army, no unified rulership. Mecca and Medina were under the ruling of the Shia, who were fighting over the Mecca, over the Kaaba, over the Black Stone. The Shia would fight each other in the Kaaba and kill each other. In the midst of all that, some of the greatest scholars of Islam emerged. Come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Bringing people back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Uniting the ummah of Islam. Bringing people back to the Quran, the Sunnah. Reviving the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like we're seeing today. Ikhwani, when we study the history of Palestine, and when we study the history of the Islamic Empire and the Islamic Ummah, we feel that there's so many similarities between what the Muslims went through nearly 1,000 years ago and tonight. We find so many similarities between the era that they went through, the problems that they went through, the fragmentation, the division, the problems from the outside and the inside, as we face today. And Ikhwani, we learn from them. The scholars of Islam, Ikhwani, have taught us so much. How they were unified. How they stayed steadfast over their religion. Stay firm, akhi, on your religion, regardless who's with you and who's against you. Stay on the haqq firm. And this is what the Shia countries and the Shia ministries and people in power did not like. Some of them could not care, they were too intoxicated. And some of them actually cared, so they sent assassins, they'll jail the scholars, they'll drive them out of their homes, they'll take away their wealth, take away their limbs, take away anything they can just to stop these people. And here we have Ikhwani, from underneath the pressure, we have scholars emerging who have woken up the ummah. And this awakening, Ikhwani, these movements took nearly 100 years to reap its fruits. The scholars of Islam at that time began 100 years before Salah ad-Din emerged. So that next week or the week after, when we told you Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi had soldiers who'd wake up the night worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's the fruits of scholars of nearly 100 years before that. When we told you that Salah ad-Din would travel between his army, and if he found a tent of people laughing, who order his soldiers to ask him to stop laughing, and will say, this is where defeat comes from. It wasn't just something that emerged overnight. 100 years, Ikhwani, worth of dawah, bringing back the ummah to its religion. Ikhwani, a quick snapshot of the Muslim world at that time, and a very quick snapshot of the non-Muslim world at that time, and we finish off with that. We have the Muslim Empire, which was left off from Al-Khilafah Rashida. Ali radiallahu anhu passed it on, and the Umayyads took it, then Al-Abbasis, and the Abbasis weakened, dunya, fitan, woman, power, money, etc. They became so weak. The Shia madhab infiltrated power. They infiltrated northern Africa, all the way to Egypt, included that. They ruled Palestine, ruled Jerusalem, ruled northern Syria, northern Iraq, ruled parts of Syria, Arabia. Then we had normal Shia, then we had extremist Shia which ruled Yemen and Bahrain, Then extremist Shia had fights within the normal Shia, with other normal Shia, and took over Mecca and Medina and took the black stone, established their own Kaaba. Can you imagine all that history? Can you imagine it, Akhi? Imagine a Muslim living at that time. That's a very quick snapshot, Ikhwani, and we'll leave the Muslim world there for a second. Now we go to Europe, where Christianity is sort of at its peak. Where the Christians were, pumping each other, doing so much da'wah to each other. They were encouraging each other to, hold firm to their religion, etc. And then when they heard that their main church was destroyed, they echoed, Ikhwani, so much that you would not believe. That Christians who had nothing to do with Christianity have started to care about the Holy Land and started wanting to go to the Holy Land. Holy Land here meaning Palestine and Jerusalem, and started wanting to die in the path of Christianity and for the Crusaders in the Holy Land. And at that same time, they were so, encouraged and so pumped up, you could say, in Europe. They had a main division between them, the Christian groups. So now, from one mainstream of Christianity, we have Catholicism, or Catholics coming out, and Orthodox. So the Orthodox people took the eastern part of Europe, the Catholics took the western part of Europe. And the Catholics focused all their efforts to remove the Muslims from Spain, Al-Andalus, as it's known back then, which is also Muslim land that we have forgotten about, Ikhwani. Tonight we're talking about Palestine and the Aqsa. One day we should be talking about Spain, Al-Andalus, Ikhwani, Qurtuba, Tulaytila, Ishbailia, all these Muslim lands and Muslim cities which was taken from us when we forgot or let go of our principal Islamic faith, and we let go of some of our Islamic principles. So here we have the Crusaders attacking the Muslims in Spain and began sending their troops towards Palestine and Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And we finish off tonight, Ikhwani, with one last group. And it's the Turks. And Ikhwani, subhanAllah, in that there's a fine and a beautiful example. The Turks, who were they? They were, tribes which were near the Persian cities and near the east of Persia. And they started to move and they accepted Islam as a religion on their own, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they believed in their Islam. And under the leadership of one of the main Turks, one of the founders of Turkey, by the name of Alp Arslan, here we have a young Islamic, Sunni stronghold in Turkey. They kept moving forward up until they opened up so many parts of Turkey, northern Syria, or northern Bilad al-Sham. And they had major influence over the upcoming years of the history of Palestine, of the history of Al-Quds, of the history of Jerusalem, and the main impact on the Ummah even till today, Ikhwani. So Ikhwani, we'll leave it off at that, inshallah. Just know that Islamic history, it's not just a story that we listen to. The history of Palestine, the history of Al-Aqsa, the history of Jerusalem, it's not a bedtime story, Ikhwani. It is formulas from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you could summarize it in one verse. إن تنصروا الله ينصركم ويثبت أقدامكم. If you give victory to Allah and His religion, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you victory and will give you steadfastness. We'll ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us steadfastness in this world and in the hereafter. And Ikhwani, inshallah, next week we'll be talking about the Crusaders. When did they start their crusades? What ignited them? How many times did they send crusades to the Holy Land? What was the Islamic response to the Crusaders? What role did the Shia play at that time? The Shia, what role did they play? How did they help the Crusaders infiltrate the Muslim lands? Who were the Zankis? This Zanki family, who is it? And who was Nuruddin az-Zanki, rahimahullah? One of the greatest figures of the Islamic history, which the Muslim Ummah doesn't know about. Let us find all that, inshallah, and more next week. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
تقدم